Have you ever sensed the bone-chilling breeze of the Carpathians? Listen to wolves crying across the vast woodlands of Transylvania. Across the ages, these noises reverberate, bearing murmured tales of age-old curses, beings that exist in the liminal space between life and death, along with heathen ceremonies that outlasted Christianity's arrival. Step into territories where tradition is no empty belief, but a hereditary recollection etched into the very lineage of its inhabitants. My name is Obsidian Vault, and this evening we will delve into the icy fog that shrouds Eastern Europe. In those regions, each settlement conceals dreadful mysteries. Every woodland harbors ravenous fiends, and all graveyards echo with the wails of anguished spirits. Brace yourselves tonight. We step beyond the familiar limits to investigate 12 Gothic myths that have troubled countless generations, ranging from the ancient bloodsuckers of Wallachia to the sorceresses of the Bulan Peaks, and from Poland's shape-changers to Russia's avenging phantoms. These tales were never meant to amuse youngsters around a hearth. They represent shared terrors that mirror realities of humanity and the dread that stirs when we violate the thresholds of the holy. Should you, like myself, be drawn to the gloom hidden in Europe's overlooked recesses, please subscribe to our channel and turn on alerts. Tell us in the comments which myth unsettled you the deepest. And now, let us commence our voyage through the darkness of Eastern Europe. Strigoi the deceased that refused to stay dead. Romania, Moldova. Pay close attention as I recount a being that existed long before Stoker's Dracula. Across the gloomy regions of Wallachia and Moldova, where breezes bear the aroma of dug soil and melted taper wax, people murmur about the Strigoi. These are not the vampires depicted in literature. They are infinitely more dreadful. Picture a tortured spirit that cannot embrace its demise, coming back to torment the living with an unquenchable craving, not solely for blood, but for vitality, vigor, youthfulness, the core of being itself. The Strigoi can be identified by its hideous form. Flame-red hair, eyes that shine in the dark like coals, and a corpse-like paleness rendering the skin nearly see-through. In contrast to glamorized vampires, the Strigoi is a monstrous entity that slithers through shadows, leaving destruction and insanity behind. What creates a Strigoi? It arises from violent demise, self-inflicted death, or when someone passes on with unresolved matters or bitterness in their soul. Even more horrifying, a baby born with teeth or a membrane covering its face is fated to turn into a Strigoi after dying. Folklore speaks of Radu, a smith who perished in 1847 following his wife's betrayal. 3 nights post-burial, residents of Brasov started recounting dreadful sightings. Radu roaming the roads at midnight, rapping on homes, shouting the names of his old neighbors. Those who responded to his summons were discovered the following morning, having aged many years overnight. Can you conceive the terror? The Strigoi does more than just slay. It devours the life force, transforming its victims into hollow remnants, animated mummies that deteriorate until mortality takes hold. To eliminate a Strigoi, the corpse must be dug up and its heart pierced with an oakwood stake. However, caution is crucial. If the heart is missed, the creature will rouse with intensified rage, and no mortal power will be capable of halting it. Rusalka, the temptresses of icy waterways, hail from Russia, Ukraine, and Poland. Out of the dark depths of the Volga and the icy currents of the Carpathians arises one of the most alluring yet lethal entities. This being of Slavic legend is the Rusalka, a blend of woman, water, spirit, and primordial terror. Make no mistake, they are not the mermaids of Western fables. The Rusalki originate from sorrow, untimely demise, and female desperation. These are the spirits of girls who met their end in water, some through mishap, others by their own hand, many slain by heartless partners or brutal spouses. Envision Katerina, a 16-year-old peasant lass, betrothed against her will to a man she abhorred. On the eve of her marriage, she escaped to the edge of the Nepa River and plunged into the freezing waters. Her spirit, unwilling to endure such unfairness, mutated into a threat far greater than a mere dead body. No mortal man can withstand the otherworldly allure of the Rusalka. Her tresses flow like kelp, her eyes shimmer with the green of lake bottoms, and her enchanting voice carries across the misty dawn. Under full moon skies, she sings upon the riverbanks, enticing lone wanderers with vows of everlasting affection. Yet what destiny lies in store for those who yield to her sorcery? The Rusalka pulls her victims down to the watery depths, drowning them gradually while relishing every flicker of fear in their gaze. This act is not simple vengeance. It is a dire requirement. To sustain her existence straddling the realms of life and death, she must draw upon the life essence of men. In the week known as Rusalka Week, just before Pentecost, these beings grow particularly restless. They rise from the rivers in throngs, dancing bare across the meadows, luring not just adult males, but also inquisitive youngsters who stray too near the shore. The sole safeguard is to carry a sprig of oak or wormwood holy flora that the Rusalki dread. And under no circumstances should you answer the melody that reverberates from shadowy waters in the deep night. Baba Yaga, the Hag of Bones. Across Russia and the Slavic lands, deep in the Russian woods where pines cluster so thickly that they shroud the sun at noon, there stands a cottage that flouts every principle of physics and logic. This abode rests on enormous chicken legs, stalking the forest as if it were a waking nightmare. This hut belongs to Baba Yaga, likely the most fearsome witch in global folklore. She is no mere enchantress. She is an ancient, pre-Christian power, embodying the deepest shadow of the feminine divine. Baba Yaga wears three countenances: the benefactor who grants aid to the courageous, the sentinel who examines the ethical mettle of those who come, and the consumer, who devours all who falter in her trials. She is a being with teeth of iron and legs of bone, soaring across the heavens inside a mortar. She navigates using a pestle and erases her trail with a whisk broom of birch twigs. Her cottage perpetually whirls on its foul limbs, while the fence encircling it is decorated with human craniums whose hollow eyes gleam with eerie flames. Whenever a visitor comes asking for assistance, the dwelling spins away, refusing entry until worth has been demonstrated. A story tells of a youth named Ivan, a woodcutter's boy, who journeyed to Baba Yaga to rescue his ailing mother. As he arrived at the rotating shack, she appeared a hag so old that her iron mouthpieces had etched furrows in her lips, her nails curved like talons, and her beak-like nose almost brushed her chin. "Tiny human," she shrieked, her tone akin to gnashing millstones. "You desire my assistance, so you shall perform 3 chores. Blunder at any, and I'll crush your skeleton to bake my loaf." The initial challenge: arrange a chamber of assorted cereals by sunrise. The next: fetch an enchanted ring from the depths of a lake protected by aquatic spirits. The third: solve her puzzle regarding the very essence of mortality. Ivan managed the first 2 feats using wit and bravery. Yet confronted with the last enigma, he grasped the dreadful reality. Baba Yaga was not measuring his intellect. She was presenting him with a decision: wisdom or purity. Providing the right reply would mean acknowledging that certain insights cost a person their humanity. In return, he would obtain help surpassing his most extravagant fantasies. Items of enchantment, foresight of the future, the ability to alter fate itself. Yet for those who stumble, their cries reverberate across the woods for an entire week, day and night, until nothing but quietness lingers. Have you ever pondered the cost of acquiring the secrets you desire? Which limits would you transgress to rescue the ones dear to you? Deep within the Russian wilderness, Baba Yaga continues to linger. Her grinding bowl and pestle stand prepared to transport her to any soul audacious enough to request her assistance. UI, the blood drinkers from Bohemia, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. Long before Transylvania got linked to vampires, the regions of Bohemia and Moravia murmured about beings far older and more horrifying. These upir entities exist in a realm that mixes the undead with something much darker. Imagine the gentle slopes of the Czech landscape during the 1300s, where Gothic churches thrust upward like rocky digits grasping at the sky. In this very location, the hamlet of Kanahora, the earliest documented encounter with a UI, disrupted the tranquil life of a pious Christian settlement. In contrast to the noble vampires depicted in subsequent tales, the upir emerged directly from the earth, a rustic beast, rough and ravenous. The metamorphosis started with Vartlav, the mill operator, notorious for his harshness towards destitute individuals seeking alms for corn. As the Black Death ravaged the village in 1347, Václav withheld support from the afflicted, choosing instead to gain from their hopelessness. He met his end, savagely dismembered by wolves inside his own grinding house, yet his demise, apparently, only marked the commencement of his genuine terror. 3 evenings following interment, farm animals started perishing for no clear reason, exsanguinated yet without any injuries visible. Youngsters claimed to have spotted a ghostly shape skulking about, its crimson eyes gleaming like embers in a smithy. The Upir from Bohemian folklore has specific traits that set it apart from other blood-sucking corpses. This creature may only emerge from its burial site during the period from dusk till dawn. However, within that time frame, it wields otherworldly power and has the capacity to control canines, flying mammals, and rodents. More dreadfully, it holds on to broken recollections from its mortal existence, employing that awareness to harass its previous associates. Václav would materialize before people he used to know, addressing them in person, recalling common experiences, drawing them near in order to drain their vitality. Those he attacked did not just lose their blood. They contracted a debilitating illness that left them pallid and feeble, rendering them more vulnerable to further assaults. The local cleric, Father Karl, recorded the entity's deeds in his diary, giving us one of the oldest comprehensive descriptions of vampire conduct. He penned, "The being that used to be Václav looks nearly mortal, except for the pallor of the grave on its skin and the dreadful craving in its stare. It communicates using his tone, but each utterance bears the icy touch of the tomb." The ultimate clash occurred when the Upir committed an error of focusing on the clergyman's small nephew. Father Karl, equipped with sanctified water, a cross, and an oak spike consecrated by the Archbishop of Prague, guided a band of locals to the burial ground at sunrise. They discovered Václav's remains within his burial plot. However, this was far from a serene slumber. The cadaver exhibited no decomposition. Crimson fluid smeared its mouth, and its nails had extended, becoming lengthy and pointed. While they hammered the wooden spike into its chest, the being's eyes flew open, locking onto Father Karol with a look of utter wickedness. "You believe this concludes matters, clergyman?" It wheezed in its dying moment. "More exist. The thirst propagates like a blaze, and shortly your deity shall be insufficient to shield you." The Upir's foretelling turned out to be accurate. Over the course of 12 months, 3 additional incidents occurred in adjacent hamlets, each adhering to an identical blueprint. A brutal or avaricious individual perishing in a violent manner, then reappearing with an unquenchable craving for sanguine fluid. According to the Czech chronicles, there are numerous ways to detect and eliminate these beings. They produce no mirror image, are unable to traverse flowing water, and are driven away by garlic and sacred symbols. What is perhaps most terrifying is the notion that an Upir can be truly vanquished only if every victim it has fed from is also located and purified. This sets off an infinite loop of inquiry and dread. Can you sense that cold shiver crawling along your back? The Upir serves as a reminder that evil, once set free, propagates like a disease, tainting not only single persons, but whole societies. In the tranquil hamlets of Bohemia, locals continue to hang garlic above their doors and keep crosses near their hearts, because they understand that certain cravings never truly fade. Vila are the tempest dancers of Serbia, Croatia, and Bosnia. A myth that resonates with the innermost spirit of the Balkan people originates from the gusty summits of the Dinaric Alps. The Vira embody nature's spirits, equally gorgeous and fearsome, who whirl atop mountain peaks and master storm's wrath. These are not the mild fairies found in children's tales. The Va are the spirits of women who passed away prematurely. These are young women who died of broken hearts, brides slain on their marriage day, and mothers who perished during childbirth. Their suffering mutated them into entities beyond mortal comprehension, creatures of pure, primordial energy. Picture Melissa, a shepherd's daughter from the Montenegrin highlands, betrothed to a youthful warrior who departed to fight the Ottoman forces. For 7 years she anticipated his revival, becoming wan and slender like alpine snow, until news arrived that he had perished in a far-off valley. On that same evening, While thunder roared across the summits, Melissa ascended to the tallest precipice and threw herself into the void. Yet death could not confine her sorrow. She emerged as a Vera, her shape alternating between a stunning woman and a being of breeze and thunderbolt. Her tresses turned silver like lunar glow, her garments crafted from dawn's fog, and her dancing can invoke tempests strong enough to flatten woodlands. The Va manifest to wanderers in the highlands, typically at sunrise or twilight. When the boundary dividing realms becomes tenuous, their beauty is piercing, their voices reminiscent of glass chimes, and their motions as elegant as a running stream. But hidden beneath this otherworldly loveliness is an untamable, perilous wildness. Oz. Dance embodies both a gift and a curse. When she dances in happiness, wildflowers blossom at irregular times. Brooks flow pure and pleasant, and the alpine breeze becomes saturated with the aroma of heaven. Yet when she dances from grief or anger, the ground itself quakes, trees are torn out by otherworldly gusts, snow slides, overwhelmed settlements, and lightning hits with retributive accuracy. Serbian legendary tradition recounts the tale of Marko Krauvic, a mythic hero who met a Va while hunting in the Kopaonik Mountains. She emerged beside a sparkling pond, more gorgeous than any human female, and dared him to a dance. Marko, famous for his might and bravery, agreed. As they whirled, the Vera's motions grew progressively frenzied and mesmerizing. The atmosphere itself began to spin, and Marko sensed his vitality being siphoned from his frame like liquid from a cracked container. He understood belatedly that this was no harmless amusement. The Vera was evaluating if he deserved to live. "Speak, hero," she murmured as they twirled ever faster. "What grants a mortal permission to take life from the woods? Why is your requirement more important than that of the stag you chase, the wolves you kill?" Marko's response decided his destiny. If he had bragged about human dominance or asserted divine entitlement, she would have whirled him to his demise, leaving just his skeleton to caution future passers-by. Instead, he confessed that every existence is holy, that he only took what was essential to live. He paid homage to the soul of each animal he took. The Vera grinned and set him free, but first left her mark, a silver strand braided into his locks. This token meant he stood under her shield. From then on, no tempest could hurt him. No feral creature would assault him. Moreover, he could perceive the very whispers of the natural world. Yet such safeguarding carries a cost. Individuals branded by the storm dancers can never completely resume normal human existence. They transform into links between the natural and the paranormal, perceiving sights and sounds hidden from others. Many consider this a blessing. To others, it is a lovely affliction. The Vera instruct that nature is no mere servant but an equal, commanding reverence and granting insight to the modest who choose to heed. Across the Balkan peaks, shepherds continue to leave bread and wine on lofty summits. They seek to placate the storm dancers, guaranteeing safe travel through their territory. Pay close attention during gusty evenings. Should you detect music emerging directly from the breeze and spot a silhouette swaying on a far hill, recall that certain dances are too exquisite for human sight, and certain tempests arise from shattered hearts that never mend. Domovoi, the household spirits of Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. Not every entity in Eastern European myth lurks in deep woods or cursed burial grounds. Some share their dwellings with people, integrating into the very essence of home life. Introducing the Domovoi house spirits, whose influence can bestow wealth or disaster based on the treatment they receive. Imagine a classic Russian izba, a timber home featuring ornate window carvings and a central brick oven. To the casual observer, the structure seems vacant, except for people, yet those acquainted with ancient traditions understand the truth. Each dwelling, each fireplace, each doorway contains a domovoi, a domestic entity as old as the Slavic race. The domovoi manifests as a diminutive old man, height no greater than a child, fully enveloped in gray hair, with luminous eyes reflecting age-old knowledge. Some claim his countenance is that of a human, Alternate accounts say his form vacillates between man and animal. He resides in the coziest areas of the home behind the oven, beneath the doorstep, or in the underground pantry where winter supplies are kept. This domestic sprite is inherently neither benevolent nor malevolent. Instead, it mirrors the nature of those it tends. A compassionate household observing ancient customs will discover their domovoi to be a loyal protector. He stokes the flame during frigid winters, guards slumbering children, alerts to imminent threats, and guarantees that bread proves ripe and milk remains fresh. However, misery awaits the family that demonstrates disrespect or neglects requisite tributes. An infuriated domovoi transforms into a tormentor beyond belief. He shatters tableware after dark, ruins edibles, triggers mishaps, and sends night terrors to the sleeping. The sound of his steps reverberates across the dwelling like ominous drumming, and his wrathful wails can push a whole household into insanity. The story of the Vulov family from Novgorod exemplifies the two sides of the domovoi's character. For generations, the Vulovs had venerated their household spirit, offering bread and salt, uttering his name with reverence, never presuming upon his guardianship. Done. In exchange, their household thrived, crops were abundant, offspring remained healthy, and the fireplace never ceased to provide warmth. However, when the youthful Pavel Volkov came back from Moscow in 1876, steeped in Western education and brimming with contemporary doubt, the entire dynamic shifted. He ridiculed his grandmother's tributes to the domovoi, denouncing those convictions as outdated superstition, and prohibited every household member from recognizing the entity's existence. The domovoi's retaliation came quickly and horrifically. The family's finest horse inexplicably shattered its leg. Their kept grain was overrun with pests within a single night. Unexplained mishaps tormented the home. Cutlery tumbled off racks. Boiling liquid splashed for no reason. Doors crashed closed with enough power to break bones. The most chilling occurrences were the midnight invasions. The domovoi used to perch atop the chests of slumbering relatives, almost choking them as it murmured reproaches into their hearing. "You have overlooked thankfulness." Its tone sounded like dried leaves stirring. "You have forsaken the ancient agreements. Now experience what existence without safety is like." Pavel's youthful spouse started to weaken, asserting that she felt perpetually observed by antagonistic gazes. His offspring wailed all night long, describing a furious grandfather figure who tugged at their locks and pinched them while they dozed. Even Pavel started to question his own disbelief after continually discovering his belongings reorganized into patterns that formed ancient Slavic curses. The suffering stopped solely when Pavel's grandmother, disobeying her grandchild's commands, carried out the customary rite of pacification. She prepared newly made bread, dusted it with salt and honey, then positioned it beside the hearth while reciting the archaic phrases. "Elder domovoi, ruler of this dwelling, we continue to respect you. Pardon our oversight and become our ally again." On that same evening, the malevolent force departed, the mishaps stopped, the bad dreams vanished, and the entire structure appeared to relax. Yet the domovoi's mercy was accompanied by a caution conveyed via the grandmother's sleep. Recall that particular ties cannot be severed by schooling or contemporary thinking. Certain pacts are inscribed in lifeblood and respiration, not through pen and sheet. The domovoi embodies the time-honored belief that residences are far more than simple structures. They are animate beings, possessing their own souls and demands. By honoring the domovoi, our predecessors understood that genuine household peace demands reverence for powers outside human influence. Even now, in isolated Russian settlements, households continue to observe the age-old traditions. They address their homes with gentle words, deposit gifts near the fireplace, and attentively heed the noises that reveal their domovoi's temper, because they comprehend what Pavel Volkov discovered after it was too late, that certain customs endure because they contain realities regarding existence that pure logic cannot capture. Do you perceive those creaks and moans inside your own residence during the night? The shifting of wooden beams, you might suggest? Maybe. Or maybe you also have a protector, whose existence you have never recognized, whose safeguarding you have assumed. The Domovoi tells us that appreciation is not frailty but sagacity, and the primal pacts are often the ones most deserving of observance. Nosferatu, the bringers of plague, Eastern Germany, Poland. Well before Murnau's cinematic phantom crept through quiet cinemas, the term Nosferatu instilled dread among the folk of German and Polish hamlets. This was not a charming aristocrat in formal attire, but a hideous herald of sickness and demise that rose from the ground amid eras of epidemic and blight. The name itself derives from the Greek nospheros, meaning pestilence carrier. And truly, wherever the Nosferatu moved, sickness tagged along like a devoted canine. Such beings originated not out of noble lineages, but from the most miserable demises conceivable. Those who succumbed to plague in such torture and despair that their spirits declined to yield to the tomb's hold. During the winter of 1580, while the bubonic plague ravaged the settlements beside the Uda River, the initially documented Nosferatu emerged in territory that is currently western Poland. Heinrich, the rodent catcher, a fellow. He amassed his fortune safeguarding grain stores from pests, stockpiling the harvest while his community withered from hunger. When the plague ultimately took him, his corpse displayed the telltale symptoms: darkened digits, inflamed lymph glands, and a body speckled with infection. As was fitting for someone who had demonstrated such brutality toward the afflicted, they interred him in unhallowed soil. Yet Heinrich's greed forged a craving that outlasted his demise. After 3 nights, he dug himself out of the icy ground, transformed into a being far more dreadful than any mortal. The Nosferatu that Heinrich evolved into barely echoed his former self. His skin had turned a ghastly gray, marred by dark veins throbbing with tainted blood. His nails elongated into amber claws, ideal for ripping through fabric and tissue. His eyes, recessed far into his sockets, were the most terrifying feature. They emitted a faint, grotesque luminescence, hinting at the rot within. In contrast to other reanimated corpses, the Nosferatu had an eerie bond with sickness and pests. Rodents trailed behind him, transporting flea-borne pestilence that brought fatality to each house he approached. Merely existing, he poisoned the environment, delivering heat, insanity, and emaciation to every person who inhaled that air. The entity's stalking habits displayed a warped cunning. Heinrich's initial visits were reserved for those he had injured during his lifetime. These were the households he had condemned to hunger and the youngsters who had pleaded for sustenance. However, his retaliation wasn't a quick demise. Rather, he would linger beyond their windows, evening after evening. Exhaling his toxic breath via crevices, he gradually contaminated whole families with an otherworldly pestilence. The chronicles of Father Wilhelm of Roswaf recorded the monster's campaign of horror. He recorded, "The being that used to be Heinrich delivers fatality, not via brutality, but via decay itself. Whomever he calls upon falls ill and perishes inside a week, their frames turning into receptacles for the identical malice that drives him. We have locked the chapel portals and offer unending prayers, yet his darkness still crosses our entrance." The Nosferatu's pestilence shared no similarity with any ordinary illness. Those afflicted suffered intense delusions of decayed provisions, insect hordes, and the entity's ghastly visage looming from each dark corner. They acquired an unquenchable desire for uncooked flesh and an aversion to sacred emblems. During the terminal phase, they would utter words with alien voices, listing the names of Heinrich's forthcoming targets. The horror ceased solely when a band of survivors, guided by Father Wilhelm, traced the creature to its den. This was a deserted mill, the same place where Heinrich had previously kept his stockpiled wheat. They discovered him in broad sunlight, his form stiff and seemingly dead. Encircling him lay thousands of deceased rodents and the skeletal bones of those he had infected. Annihilating the Nosferatu demanded more than ordinary wooden spikes and sanctified liquid. This being drew life from illness. Thus, its obliteration required cleansing through flames. They constructed a bonfire using rowan timber and consecrated plants, then hurled Heinrich's corpse into the blaze along with every item he had contacted. As the fire devoured him, onlookers claimed to hear not crying, but the noise of countless perishing rodents. Even that proved insufficient. The tainted mill needed to be consumed by fire, the adjacent earth consecrated and mixed with salt, and each dwelling in the hamlet purified using smoke from combusted sage and juniper. Because the Nosferatu's taint could persist in items, structures, even the atmosphere itself, poised to generate fresh monstrosities when circumstances allowed. The tale of Hinrich serves as a reminder that malevolence assumes numerous guises, and that avarice amid hardship can birth creatures beyond conventional comprehension. Within Eastern European mythology, the Nosferatu embodies not merely bodily demise, but moral decay, the alteration of human character into an entity that it thrives on the anguish of others. While contemporary medicine has subdued the epidemics that once haunted our forebears, the profound message within Nosferatu's lore retains its significance. Even now, there exist individuals who benefit from pain, who stockpile goods while others go hungry, who disseminate various forms of poison into the communities they touch. And perhaps, in a cosmic sense, such people risk becoming the very monsters they personify in life. Listen for the scraping at your windows on nights when sickness fills the air. Search your dreams for visions of decay and corruption. For Nosferatu teaches us that some hungers are so grotesque, so fundamentally opposed to life itself, that they can survive death, and, in surviving, spread their corruption to everything they touch. The Ley, forest guardian, Russia, Finland, Baltic states. Deep in the primeval forests that stretch from the Baltic to the Urals dwells a creature older than Christianity, older than human memory itself. The Ley, lord of the forest, guardian of the wild, a being of such primal power that even mentioning his name incorrectly can summon his terrible attention. This is no gentle tree spirit from fairy tales, but a force of nature incarnate, as vast and unpredictable as the wilderness itself. The Ley stands as tall as the trees he protects. His body is covered in bark-like skin. His hair and beard are woven from moss and pine needles. His eyes are the green of deep forest pools, ancient and knowing, holding memories of when the world was young and humans were merely another species struggling for survival. The Ley possesses the ability to change his size at will, shrinking to hide behind the smallest sapling, or growing until his head brushes the clouds. His voice can mimic any sound of the forest, the whisper of wind through leaves, the crack of breaking branches, the call of wolves. Most disturbing of all, he can perfectly imitate human voices, using this ability to lead travelers astray in the endless maze of trees. Vasile Petro, a merchant from Tvare, learned this lesson in the harshest possible way during the autumn of 1654. Leading a caravan of goods through the forest road to Novgorod, he ignored his guide's warnings about showing proper respect to the forest spirits. When the old woodsman insisted they leave offerings of bread and salt at a particular grove, Vasile mocked such peasant superstitions and ordered the caravan to continue. That evening, as they made camp in a clearing that seemed somehow too perfectly circular, too deliberately arranged, strange things began to happen. First, their horses became restless, whinnying and trying to break free of their tethers. Then the temperature dropped unnaturally, despite the lack of wind or clouds. Finally, as full darkness fell, they heard voices calling from the forest, the voices of their family members crying out for help. Vasile's youngest nephew, Parvil, heard his mother calling for him and rushed toward the sound before anyone could stop him. They searched all night by torchlight, calling his name until their voices were hoarse, but found no trace of the boy. As dawn broke, they discovered something that chilled them to the bone, a single set of footprints leading from their camp into the forest. But these prints changed as they progressed, starting human-sized but gradually becoming larger. The spacing between them increased until they were the stride of a giant. The Ley had taken Pavel, but not out of mere malice. In the folklore of the forest people, the Ley serves as both judge and executioner for those who disrespect the wilderness. He protects not only the trees and animals, but the ancient balance between human civilization and the wild places that existed before cities, before farms, before humans decided they were masters rather than participants in the natural world. For 3 days, Vasilei's caravan searched the forest, guided by the old woodsman who knew the proper rituals for appeasing the lay. They left offerings at sacred groves, spoke the ancient words of respect, and performed the ceremonies their ancestors had practiced for generations. On the third night, as they prepared to give up hope, they heard Pavel's voice again. But this time, it came from directly above them. Looking up, they saw the boy suspended in the highest branches of an enormous pine tree, far too high for any human to climb. He appeared unharmed, but somehow changed, and his clothes were dry despite 3 days of autumn rain. His face held an expression of profound peace, and when he spoke, his voice carried an echo of wind through leaves. "The forest guardian has unveiled to me incredible marvels," Pavla murmured, his tone ethereal and remote. "I have glimpsed the hidden realms where ancient gods still preside, where the passage of time is utterly different, where the ancient trees still recall the very first melodies ever sung." He states, "I may come back to you, yet I am obliged to deliver his message. You cannot seize the forest without first seeking its consent." The lay gently lowered Parvil to the earth, its branches curving like animate limbs. When the boy made contact with the ground once more, the temperature reverted to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The horses grew calm. Yet Vasily noticed that his nephew's eyes now contained flecks of green that had never been there before. From time to time, as the wind rustled through the trees, Parvil would cock his head, as if listening to voices only he could perceive. The merchant's caravan finished its journey without any further incidents. Yet Vasily found himself permanently changed by that encounter. He never again traveled through forests without leaving proper offerings, nor did he fell a tree without first asking permission. He never forgot that certain forces demand reverence, not fear. His nephew Parvil eventually became a celebrated woodsman and guide. He could navigate any woodland without compass or map, as though the trees themselves whispered directions into his ear. The lay represents humanity's ancient understanding that we are not separate from nature. We are part of it, subject to its laws and dependent on its mercy. In an era when forests are viewed as resources to be exploited, rather than as living ecosystems to be revered. The legend of the forest guardian reminds us that our relationship with the wild world carries consequences far beyond economics. Modern environmentalists may smile at the primitive beliefs of Russian peasants, but the lay embodies a wisdom that scientific ecology has only recently started to rediscover. Forests are complex, interconnected communities of life. Cutting down trees without understanding these connections can lead to catastrophic outcomes. Approaching the wilderness with humility rather than arrogance is not. This is not superstition, it is survival. The next time you walk in a deep forest, pay attention to the quality of silence around you. Notice how sound travels differently among old trees, and how shadows appear to move independently from their sources. How certain groves seem imbued with more life than others. You may not see the lay, but he sees you, and he remembers every gesture of respect or disrespect you show toward his domain. In the great forests of Eastern Europe, his name is still spoken with reverence. They still leave offerings at the old groves, still ask permission before taking from the wild. They still remember that some guardians never sleep and never forget. For the lay teaches us that the price of forgetting our place in the natural order is not merely ecological disaster, but the loss of our own humanity. Kikimora, the swamp witch, Russia, Belarus, Lithuania. In the murky depths of Eastern European marshlands, where mist clings to stagnant water and treacherous bogs, lie hidden, horrifying secrets. There dwells one of the most feared creatures in Slavic folklore. The Kikimora, neither fully alive nor completely dead, a being born from the intersection of water, earth, and feminine rage. Imagine the endless fens of Belarus, where traditional villages perch on islands of solid ground, surrounded by vast expanses of wetland. To outsiders, these marshes might appear empty, lifeless wastes. But those who live in the wetlands know better. They understand that these waters teem with spirits, and none more dangerous than the Kikimora. Her form is that of a haggard woman, ageless. Her flesh has the gray-green hue of stagnant pond algae. Damp, matted locks dangle, entwined with marsh grass and tiny bones. According to some accounts, her lower limbs resemble those of a chicken. Other versions assert that her lower half dissipates into fog when danger approaches. Yet every tale concurs on one detail. Her hands, with fingers unnaturally long, terminate in black claws. Those fingers are ideally suited for penetrating murky depths to seize the careless. The origins of the Kikimora differ across locales, yet the consensus is that she was originally a mortal woman who met her end in water through a tragic event. Certain stories depict her as a suicide, taking her own life to flee a forced union. Alternatively, she is described as a bride murdered and cast into the bog by an envious rival. The most unsettling account proposes that she was a sorceress who struck a bargain with evil forces, surrendering her human essence in exchange for rule over the swamps. Regardless of her inception, the Kikimora's character is undeniably wicked. She takes pleasure in misdirecting wanderers using willow, the wisp's eerie lights that flicker over the fen. These spectral flames entice victims further into the quagmire until they vanish below. Contrary to the swift demises inflicted by other creatures, perishing in a Kikimora's marsh is a protracted torment. She maintains her prey on the brink of life, nourishing herself on their fear while they gradually sink into the mire. The tale of Mara the Weaver exemplifies the Kikimora's specific harshness directed at females. Mara was celebrated across Prepit marshes for her mastery of the loom and thread, producing fabrics of such exquisite beauty that aristocrats journeyed from far-off towns to hire her. Yet her gift carried a cost. Countless hours hunched over her weaving frame, she forsook wedlock and maternity for creative excellence. On an autumn night, while Martha toiled late by candle flame, she detected the rhythmic sound of a second loom emerging from the fen. That cadence was mesmerizing, flawlessly in sync with her own shuttle. Slowly, she came to understand that the unseen weaver in the swamp possessed talent surpassing hers. Her arrogance and inquisitiveness triumphed over prudence, leading her to pursue the noise into the foggy marshlands. There she discovered the Kikimora enthroned on a seat constructed of interlaced rushes, operating a loom assembled from human bones and tendons. The yarn she wove shimmered with an uncanny luminescence, and the design emerging was lovelier than any Martha had ever conceived, a fabric that appeared to hold the core nature of moonbeams and darkness. "Mortal female," uttered the Kikimora, not raising her gaze from her creation, her tone akin to liquid burbling among reeds. "Do you consider yourself a mistress of weaving? Allow us to test whose talent is superior. We will weave until sunrise, and the one who produces the finer piece will take possession of the other's spirit." Mara, inebriated by the ordeal and the supernatural elegance of the Kikimora's artwork, agreed. They toiled all night, their looms beating in flawless rhythm like the pulses of slumbering deities. With each movement of the shuttle across the warp, Martha sensed her mortal essence seeping out of her. Her digits started to lengthen. A pallid gray hue spread across her complexion, and her eyes acquired the dull, mirror-like sheen of placid water. At the initial glow of morning, both artisans finished their fabrics. Martha's weaving was truly splendid, portraying the turnover of seasons using gold and silver threads. Yet the birth of the Kikimora transcended human understanding, unveiling the invisible bonds linking every living entity. It further revealed the concealed titles of ancient deities and the precise instant when darkness yields to light and light surrenders to darkness. Defeated, little spinner, the Kikimora grinned, exposing teeth akin to shattered seashells. "Yet, I am not utterly heartless. Your soul is yours to keep, but you shall assume my role as the marsh's protector. Craft cautionary tales for anyone who dares disrupt our domain. In exchange, I will instruct you in the designs that bind earth and sky, water and flame, existence and oblivion." Martha transformed into the Kikimora's disciple, mastering the art of spinning threads from lunar rays and celestial glows. She acquired the skill to interlace the cries of submerged souls and the murmurs of willow, the wisps. Local inhabitants recount that on transparent nights, Dancing lights still traverse the swamp in intricate formations. The kikimora and her pupil labor at their timeless looms, crafting fabrics that chart the concealed framework of existence. The kikimora stands as a cautionary tale against arrogance and seclusion. Within her aqueous domain, she embodies the feminine creative energy that has become twisted, becoming ruinous when deprived of due acknowledgement or fellowship. Her expertise in spinning and weaving mirrors the age-old spheres of women's work. Yet, her lonely life amid the bogs hints at the outcome when such creativity is severed from societal bonds. Those living in the wetlands have devised various safeguards against the kikimora's power. Needles of iron stitched into garments can thwart her from undoing the fabric of a person's existence. A crimson string tied around the wrist disrupts her capacity to spin destiny. Above all, wanderers should never pursue enigmatic glows in the bog, regardless of their allure or charm. Yet the kikimora is not entirely evil. Similar to numerous entities in East European mythology, she is amenable to negotiation when approached with due reverence. Birth attendants and folk healers occasionally call upon her assistance during arduous deliveries, because her command over the strands of existence and mortality renders her a formidable companion in creative endeavors. It is said she imparts holy weaving techniques to those women who respect ancient traditions, boons that can bestow wealth upon whole settlements. Contemporary society has mostly neglected the kikimora, casting her aside as rustic folklore. However, conservationists striving to protect bog habitats could discern within her myth a deep veracity that swamps rank among the most intricate and essential ecosystems. On Earth, she connects terrestrial and aquatic systems in ways science is only beginning to comprehend. Annihilating a swamp, from this perspective, resembles severing threads from a universal tapestry, undoing bonds that required eons to weave. The kikimora's fury at this devastation is not simply malice. Rather, it is the wrath of a skilled artisan witnessing their lifetime's labor ruined by fools too blind to appreciate its worth. This night, if you venture near marshes in the dark, scrutinize any illuminations drifting through the fog. These could be natural occurrences, foxfire, marsh gas, or glowing life forms. Alternatively, they could be the kikimora, eternally spinning her designs in the boundary between water and the heavens. She continues to impart the stern truth that ingenuity devoid of empathy morphs into a destructive force rather than a creative one. The Draugr, the Walking Dead, Scandinavia, the Chibialtic region. Emerging from the Norwegian fjords to the Finnish pine woods is a being that renders other reanimated corpses appear almost kindly in contrast. The Draugr, called Nar in Baltic lands, embodies death's stubborn hold on the living. What emerges is an entity neither fully alive nor restfully deceased. Where vampires retain traces of their prior human nature, the Draugr stands as a grotesque mockery of existence. Picture a dead body in the early stages of decomposition yet still moving with an eerie, otherworldly purpose. With every night that passes, it swells in size and grows more formidable. It transforms into a towering mass of decaying flesh and bone, driven by desires beyond human comprehension. The Draugr usually emerges from those who perished while still fiercely tied to worldly possessions, misers who clung to their gold, warriors who could not accept defeat, or anyone whose life ended while consumed by unbridled rage or greed. Death does not mark an end for them. Instead, it becomes a horrifying metamorphosis into something far worse than their living selves. During the winter of 1402, the seaside settlement of Vardo in northern Norway turned into the hunting grounds of Bern Ironwill. He was a Viking raider who could not come to terms with the fact that the era of conquest was fading. As Christianity swept across Scandinavia, Bern persisted in looting monasteries and merchant ships. He gathered an enormous cache of treasure which he concealed in hidden spots along the coastline. When rival chieftains finally trapped and slew him, Bern died, cursing them, vowing that neither death nor the new god would ever separate him from his riches. They buried him in a hasty manner on unhallowed ground, eager to forget the bloodshed he brought to their lands. But Bern's bond to his treasure proved stronger than the grip of the grave. 3 months following his interment, fishermen started reporting strange incidents along the shore. On calm nights, Boats were discovered shattered into pieces, their crews nowhere to be found. Grave mounds were seen broken open from inside, their funerary objects scattered as though someone had been desperately searching for something in particular. Most unsettling were eyewitness accounts of a giant figure wandering the coastline after dark, far larger than any human, leaving footprints that emitted a faint, sickly glow. The being Byrne had turned into stood nearly 9 feet tall, his body swollen with unnatural decay. His skin had turned a bluish black, stretched taut over muscles that kept growing despite his dead condition. His eyes shone with the frigid light of the northern lights. His breath formed an icy mist that could kill vegetation with just one exhalation. Yet the Draeger's most dreadful asset was not his immense size or strength, it was his intellect. Unlike ordinary zombies, the Draeger kept all the cunning and knowledge from its human existence, now heightened by supernatural insight and unshackled from moral limits. Byrne recalled every stash of his treasure, every foe who had wronged him, every insult he had endured. And now, with eternity at his disposal, he could pursue vengeance. His first targets were the chieftains responsible for his death. He visited their halls during the deepest part of winter, when nights seemed endless and the aurora lit the heavens with unearthly hues. His mere presence could drive men insane with terror, and his touch delivered a freezing demise that no flame could thaw. Harold Redbeard, one of those who killed him, locked himself inside his longhouse with 50 warriors, thinking safety lay in numbers. But the next morning, they discovered his stronghold buried under an avalanche that had occurred on a still, windless night. Every man inside was crushed, except for Harold himself, who was found frozen stiff yet with his eyes wide open, staring at something too horrifying to understand. The Draeger's reign of terror lasted for months, and conventional methods against the undead proved futile. Holy water evaporated upon his touch, crosses disintegrated in his presence, and blessed weapons passed through his body with no effect. The creature seemed to exist partly outside the material realm, able to become incorporeal when attacked, but terrifyingly solid when it chose to strike. Father Olaf, a Christian priest who had studied ancient traditions, eventually discovered how to defeat Byrne. The Draeger's strength originated from its link to the treasure. Each coin, every piece of jewelry, each weapon he had amassed in life served as an anchor, binding his spirit to the physical world. In order to vanquish him, they needed to locate and bless every single object he had concealed. The search for Byrne's hoard turned into a desperate race against time, as each night that passed made the Draugr more powerful and crafty. Indigenous shamans collaborated with Christian clerics, employing runic sorcery and sacred artifacts to locate the concealed caches. They unearthed gold beneath megaliths, silver stashed within coastal grottos, weapons swathed in sealskin, and offerings submerged in hallowed lakes. As they uncovered and consecrated each hidden stash, Byrne's strength waned, and his colossal physique started to contract. His otherworldly power diminished and his influence over the material realm faded, yet the entity retaliated with frantic rage, conjuring snowstorms to entomb the seekers, triggering landslides to seal mountain routes, and dispatching spectral longships, manned by wraith-like soldiers, to assault the settlements. The ultimate showdown occurred at Byrne's ancient barrow, where his largest and most valuable treasure remained concealed. Just as the clergy commenced their sanctification ceremony, the Draugr manifested in all its horrifying splendor, now translucent like frost, yet emitting a chill that solidified the atmosphere itself. His words thundered over the frozen plain, akin to splitting ice sheets. "Do you believe your feeble deity can shackle the tempest? I embody winter itself, death that strides among the living, the wrath of ancient traditions made manifest. Your rituals and emblems shall never constrain me." However, Father Olaf had gleaned an essential insight from the elder shamans. The very thing that made the Draugr most powerful was also its most vulnerable point. His obsession with earthly riches so potent that it had propelled him past the grave could likewise become the means to confine him. Once the ultimate benediction was uttered over his hoard, Byrne emitted a scream that fractured ice across leagues, his body melting away like morning frost beneath the vernal sun. But this still did not mark the finish. The shamans cautioned that a Draugr could merely be scattered for a time, never genuinely annihilated. Around his tomb, they erected a ring of stones, engraved with both runic protections and Christian symbols, instituting a custom that persisted for ages. Annually at the winter solstice, the townsfolk convened to reinforce the containment enchantments, guaranteeing that Byrne's soul stayed imprisoned. The Draugr symbolizes far more than mere dread of the undead. It also encapsulates our unease regarding the degenerative power of material obsession. In Byrne's Metamorphosis, we witness the outcome when the lust for riches grows so intense that it outlives mortality, forging an entity that can never find fulfillment, for it can never genuinely own anything. In today's era of consumerism and relentless material collection, the legend of the Draugr gains fresh significance. How many among us hold so firmly to our belongings that we overlook what is genuinely important? How many forfeit bonds, well-being, and even mental tranquility in the chase for riches we cannot carry into the afterlife? The Baltic cultures recognized that demise itself was not the greatest calamity. The real tragedy was permitting our fixations to become so entrenched that they barred us from achieving serenity even after dying. The Draugr prowls the northern darkness to remind us that certain cages are constructed by our own hands, and some shackles are fashioned not by adversaries but by our own cravings. Hear the wind wailing through the winter night and experience the chill that goes deeper than simple bodily unease. And recall that somewhere in the Arctic wastelands, held by archaic enchantments yet never fully obliterated, entities that were once human Rome. The borders separating the living from the dead impart an everlasting truth. Certain appetites can never be appeased, regardless of how much we try to satiate them. Lycanthrope, the Wolf's Curse, Poland, East Germany. Lithuania, within the immense woodlands of Eastern Europe, where wolves reigned as absolute sovereigns and humanity dwelt in perpetual terror of cries echoing through the blackness. Stories emerged about beings that connected humanity to the animal world. The werewolf, called Wilkowak, Vukodlak, or Viltakis in different lands, embodies one of humankind's most ancient and fundamental terrors, the monster hiding inside every one of us. These aren't the glamorous shape changers found in today's stories. Instead, they are beings created from authentic fear and old wisdom about the fragile boundary that divides order from chaos. Within the folklore of Poland and the Baltic nations, turning into a werewolf was simultaneously a curse and an awakening. It peeled off the layers of human disguise, exposing the primal predator that civilization struggles to keep hidden. The change could happen in many ways, each tied to different forms of ethical and spiritual decay. Certain individuals received curses from witches due to their offenses against the blameless. Others came into existence during particular celestial alignments, during a solar eclipse, or when the moon vanished and wolves cried out from the woods. Yet the most terrifying lycanthropes were those who willingly embraced their destiny, striking intentional bargains with sinister entities to gain dominion over the wild. Take the story of Stefan Kowalski, a Polish aristocrat whose lands bordered the immense Bała forest during the 1500s. Stefan had a reputation for harsh treatment of his peasants, a love for the hunt, and a firm belief that those with power were entitled by God to exploit the weak. When famine arrived in his domain, he persisted in opulence as his serfs withered from hunger, rationalizing their agony as the proper way of the world. The metamorphosis started during an especially brutal winter expedition. Stefan and his group were pursuing a large wolf pack that had slaughtered numerous farm animals belonging to the villagers. While chasing the wolves further into the ancient woods, Stefan got cut off from his men by an abrupt snowstorm. Disoriented and by himself, he sought refuge inside what seemed to be a deserted cavern. However, the cave was far from vacant. Deep within, Stefan came across a presence that shattered his grasp of what was real. A decrepit old woman calling herself the Mother of the Woods, guardian of the ancient rules dictating the bond between hunter and hunted. She presented Stefan with an option: renounce his brutality and live modestly, or accept his genuine self and turn into the flawless hunter he imagined himself to be. Stefan, still overconfident despite confronting otherworldly force, opted for the change. The ancient woman grinned, her teeth resembling shattered glass, and uttered one solitary word in a tongue, predating Polish, predating Latin, older than any known human speech. Indescribable agony tore through Stefan's frame as his bones started to elongate and snap. His muscles swelled with superhuman force, and rough fur broke out over his flesh, yet the bodily shift paled in contrast to the psychological metamorphosis. Stefan experienced his human awareness shattering. Wolf impulses overwhelmed his thoughts, the smell of dread, the flavor of gore, the compelling drive to hunt as a group. He kept his human intellect but forfeited his human ethics, morphing into a being of unadulterated hunting guile. The wolfman Stefan reached 7 feet in height when upright, blanketed in dark fur that appeared to swallow the moon's glow. His mouth could shatter bones, as if they were sticks. His talons could tear through metal plate, and his cry echoed for many miles through the woodland. The most horrifying aspect, he still could talk, employing speech to deride his prey and delight in their horror. The way he hunted exposed the distorted reasoning behind his change. Stefan selected victims that reflected the flaws he once held as a mortal. Rich people who misused their influence, mighty individuals who exploited the vulnerable, heartless ones who spared no compassion for their inferiors. In his lycanthropic shape, he became the purest manifestation of the same cold cruelty he had personified when human. For 3 years, the rural area dwelled in dread while Stefan's pack, because he had passed his affliction to others, prowled across the territory. Their cunning exceeded that of natural wolves. They laid complex snares for human quarry and orchestrated assaults with soldier-like accuracy. According to reports from witnesses, the werewolves were seen striding upright through village lanes at night, their eyes gleaming with a sinister intelligence as they chose their victims. Father Matthias, the local. The priest understood that ordinary arms would be futile against such entities. Blending Christian doctrine with ancient rural wisdom, he uncovered that werewolves, for all their supernatural might, still possessed certain human frailties. Silver could harm them because it held sacred ties to the moon goddess who governed their metamorphoses. Iron, blessed by church bells, could restrain them, linked to the industrial force that was steadily subjugating the wilderness. The clash occurred during the winter solstice, when Stefan's power peaked but his human awareness fell to its lowest ebb. Father Matthias led a band of volunteers into the Boa forest, equipped with silver-tipped lances and iron nets consecrated with holy water. They pursued the werewolf pack to a glade where ancient standing stones indicated a pre-Christian seat of power. The encounter was violent and short-lived. Stefan's pack battled with a ferocity beyond human, but their pride in their supernatural gifts had made them reckless. The sanctified weapons proved effective, injuring creatures that had seemed untouchable. More significantly, Father Matthias saw that the werewolves' prime asset, their pack devotion, could be turned against them. When Stefan was finally trapped, a silver spear piercing his heart, his transformation reversed with agonizing slowness. As he expired, his human shape restored, he delivered his dying words. "You believe you have triumphed, priest. Observe those around you. Every man here carries the wolf within. I merely had the audacity to set it free." His prophecy turned out to be partially accurate. In the months that followed, several of the men who fought the werewolves reported strange dreams. Visions of sprinting through forests on all fours, tasting blood, sensing the savage liberation Stefan had embraced. Some maintained they found their own clothes torn and blood-stained after nights they could not recall. The werewolf's curse, apparently, was not confined solely to his lineage. The werewolf tradition in Eastern European folklore functions as a complex metaphor for the interplay between civilization and savagery. Unlike Western European werewolf legends, which often focused on the tragic nature of the transformation, Slavic werewolf stories often implied that the curse uncovered the inner beast rather than conjuring it. In Stefan's tale, we face the unsettling truth that the ability for cruelty resides in all humans, and that society's structures exist not to give voice to our nobler instincts, but to hold back our baser drives. The werewolf emerges as a cautionary figure, demonstrating what unfolds when power is separated from empathy, when strength preys on the weak. The forests of Eastern Europe have been largely subdued over the centuries since these myths originated, but the psychological truths they encode remain timely. Every generation witnesses individuals who appear to lose their humanity, who exploit others with an intensity that implies something surpassing mere moral failure. The werewolf legend reminds us that the divide between human and beast is not as sharp as we might wish. On full moon nights, when the wind carries howls through the darkness, reflect on Stefan's change. Ponder how fragile the veneer of civilization truly is. How swiftly it can be torn away when we convince ourselves that our desires justify any course of action. The werewolf haunts our collective nightmares, not as an external menace, but as a mirror of our own potential for monstrous acts. In the vast forests of Poland, people still tell tales of shapes shifting among the trees. They speak of eyes that mirror firelight with an unsettling intelligence, and of howls that resemble human laughter. Whether these are real werewolves or merely the remnants of primal anxieties, their function remains unchanged. They serve as a reminder that certain cravings, once stirred, can never be entirely appeased, and some changes can never be fully undone. The poltergeist from the German-Czech border or Austria brings us to our last story, which may be the most disturbing of all paranormal occurrences, not due to the threat of physical injury, but because it profanes the very sanctity of one's home. The poltergeist, translating literally to noisy spirit in German, embodies chaos made flesh, a power that transforms ordinary surroundings into realms of unexplainable dread. In contrast to ghosts, which often appear as visual specters with defined intentions, poltergeists make themselves known through disruptions that surpass logical understanding. Items soar through space with no physical contact. Furniture shifts into unimaginable arrangements, and noises reverberate through homes as if originating from the walls themselves. During the fall of 1612, the thriving home of Master Jan Brenner, a clockmaker in the Bohemian town of Český Krumlov, became the focal point of events, so alarming that they drew scholars from Prague and investigators from the Holy Roman Empire. Initial minor irritations, doors creaking without a breeze, footsteps echoing in vacant rooms, quickly escalated into a domain of spectral horror that challenged the belief and sanity of all present. The episodes focused on Jan's 14-year-old daughter, Greta, who denied any link to the bizarre occurrences. It started with her sewing. Threads would tie themselves into knots, cloth would rip inexplicably, and needles would become bent into unnatural shapes each morning. Jan, a pragmatic individual used to the exactness of clockwork, first attributed the incidents to his daughter's lack of attention. However, the happenings soon grew far beyond what any human mistake could account for. During family dinners, plates would break on their own, propelling jagged pieces in ways that defied the laws of physics. The families meticulously assembled. Timepieces started ringing at unpredictable times, their inner workings discovered contorted into forms that should have made them unusable, but they remained functional. The most troubling aspect were the noises, not chaotic clamor, but what appeared to be deliberate messages. Raps that answered queries with exact mathematical logic, a single tap for affirmative, two for negative. Murmurs that appeared to emerge from within thick walls, uttering phrases in tongues unknown to any family member. A voice resembling that of a small child, laughing and shouting Greta's name throughout the night. Father Benedict, the village priest, first regarded the situation with doubt, stemming from his religious education. He suspected deception, possibly intended to evade an arranged marriage or shirk unwelcome obligations. However, his conviction disintegrated after his first night spent in the Brenner home. He observed occurrences that contested both his grasp of the natural order and his trust in heavenly guardianship. When Father Benedict tried to sanctify the dwelling, the sacred items he held transformed into instruments of attack against him. The crucifix became searingly hot in his grip, compelling him to release it. The holy water in its vessel began to boil, emitting vapor that took on forms like twisting serpents. The most horrifying part, the Latin prayers he recited appeared to exit his mouth in reverse, as though an unseen power was intercepting and inverting his holy utterances. The poltergeist's cleverness manifested in how it responded to differing methods of contact. Upon the arrival of scholars, bearing scientific devices crude by today's benchmarks, yet sophisticated for the early 1600s, the spirit seemed to grasp their intentions and started altering their readings in a manner that implied a playful intellect rather than malice. Dr. Marcus Linitz, a natural philosopher hailing from Prague, recorded tests where the poltergeist regularly disrupted mechanical gadgets while leaving organic items undisturbed. Timepieces halted or spun in reverse. Compasses rotated erratically, yet candles flamed normally and food stayed fresh. The entity seemed drawn particularly to items demanding exactness and system. This might echo an intimate link with the clock-making craft that first captured its interest. Greta stayed at the center of this paranormal hurricane, apparently oblivious to her part in the event, but undeniably its core. Today's scientists could identify signs of teenage emotional strain. Yet those watching in the 1600s perceived a deeper enigma at the peak of the commotions. Onlookers claimed Greta's shadow acted on its own, and her mirror image occasionally displayed movements she never performed. The most frightening episode happened during an official inquiry by imperial court envoys. While they questioned Greta in the household's main chamber, recording every query and answer, the poltergeist started flinging items with growing force. Yet the paths of these missiles showed unsettling awareness. None touched Greta directly, each came within inches, as though the being was cautious not to injure the one it was attached to. Then arrived the instant that swayed even the greatest doubters toward a supernatural explanation. When the examiners challenged Greta more harshly regarding her involvement in the events, all the clocks inside the home started ringing at once. They weren't chiming together, but in an elaborate sequence that formed messages in the town crier's antiquated Morse-style code. The communication was crystal clear and hair-raising. "She belongs to me now. Stand back." The conclusion arrived not via exorcism or scientific means, but via comprehension. Collaborating with the village-wise women, Father Benedict discovered that the poltergeist wasn't a malicious ghost, but a wandering spirit, craving communion. By methodically interrogating with the being's rapping signals, they uncovered its tale. A youthful trainee horologist who perished in the workroom many years before, killed by collapsing gear equipment. His soul remained stuck in a threshold state, betwixt existence and mortality. The specter of the apprentice was attracted to Greta because she frequented the workshop assisting her dad. The priest evoked the human bond that the ghost had forfeited. His appearances weren't assaults, they were efforts to make contact. They turned more aggressive solely when he sensed neglect or a risk of being cut off from the household. The household served as his mooring to the realm of the living. The concluding rite merged Christian liturgy with age-old customs for mollifying uneasy spirits. In the workshop, they erected a tribute to the deceased apprentice, recognizing his role in the trade and his entitlement to remembrance. They uttered his name reverently, praised his artistry, and vowed his labor would never fade away. Once the memorial ceremony ended, the paranormal commotions stopped just as abruptly as they started. The timepieces resumed regular functioning. Items stayed exactly where set, and the heavy aura that plagued the dwelling for many months dissolved like mist at dawn. Greta recounted a last message. A feeling of thankfulness and calm, as though an unknown weight she'd borne had vanished. The Brenna poltergeist incident grew into one of the earliest modern era's most completely recorded paranormal episodes. It shaped both faith-based and empirical methods for dealing with enigmatic happenings. It showed that poltergeists, in contrast to malicious ghosts, typically aimed not to hurt, but to make contact, employing the soul tools open to souls caught between planes. Contemporary psychology could account for poltergeist occurrences via unconscious psychokinesis, the notion that intense feelings, chiefly during youth, can materialize as bodily disruptions in one's surroundings. Yet the Brenna affair points to a deeper intricacy, an interplay between the human mind and powers that transcend our present grasp of existence. Poltergeists serve as a reminder that our dwellings extend beyond mere physical constructs. They become vessels for memories, emotions, and spiritual force when we inhabit places marked by powerful events. It is possible we are cohabiting with remnants of history, entities desiring recognition instead of removal. As you make yourself comfortable at home this evening, listen closely to the subtle noises nearby. Floorboards groan, wind whispers through window cracks, and far-off creaks you've grown accustomed to. These are typically only the organic noises of a building, adjusting to shifts in heat and moisture. Yet occasionally, once in a while, these sounds could signify something deeper, an entity that wishes not to scare, but to be recalled, to be accepted, to discover tranquility in mere acknowledgement. that ages past, another soul considered this dwelling their own. Thus, our expedition through the dark realms of Eastern Europe draws to a close. Yet the reverberations of these age-old narratives persist through the passages of our shared subconscious. We have journeyed alongside vampires and werewolves, frolicked with tempest spirits and woodland protectors, caught sight of the horrifying visages that gaze back at us from the shadowy reflective surfaces of myth and tradition. What insights have we gained from these expeditions into the Gothic psyche of Slavs and Balts? That their terrors served not simply as amusement, but as encrypted knowledge regarding human existence. Cautions regarding the outcomes of forsaking empathy, reverence for nature, and bonds with society. From the Strigoi, we learned that unsettled matters and lingering animosity can forge beings that surpass mortality. The Rusalka illustrated the dreadful cost of hopelessness, and how aggression towards the innocent resonates across lineages. Baba Yaga demonstrated that authority lacking discernment turns into brutality. Meanwhile, the lay reminded us that humans are not apart from the natural world, but integral to it, bound by pre-civilized statutes. Every entity we met acted as both source of fear and instructor, mirroring parts of our own being we'd rather conceal. The inner werewolf that surfaces when we persuade ourselves that might makes right for cruelty. When our craving for rapport grows so intense, it breaches the barriers among realms. These tales persist not because our forebears were more gullible than modern folk, but rather because they contained realities about humanity and nature that stay pertinent irrespective of scientific progress. In times when we frequently sense detachment from the planet, from society, from the fundamental rhythms controlling life, these Gothic stories provide both caution and direction. They remind us that certain thresholds must not be breached. Certain appetites cannot be fulfilled by physical goods. Certain bonds with the earth, with the deceased, with the untamed corners of the globe need to be upheld in order for us to stay wholly human. Should you have discovered insight within these shadowy narratives, should you sense a summons to delve deeper into global Gothic customs, then please subscribe to our channel and become a member of the Obsidian Vault Circle. Distribute these accounts among people who realize that occasionally reality appears disguised as horror, and sometimes the most vital teachings are imparted by beings that ought to be unreal. Post a comment recounting which among these Eastern European myths resonated with you most profoundly, which phantoms will accompany you into slumber this evening. And recall, by subscribing to this channel, you integrate into a timeless custom. You assume the role of story custodians that must never be lost, and protectors of knowledge originating from the obscure facet of human existence. Until our next encounter, within the torchlit halls of Gothic fantasy, may your evenings overflow with glorious frights, and your dreams be visited by verities too deep for daytime reflection. In the depths of the unknown, countless mysteries remain hidden, awaiting revelation. Obsidian Vault will be your steadfast companion as you journey through every shadow that lies ahead. Rest peacefully, beloved audience, and never forget, the most chilling monsters are those that reflect an undeniable truth within ourselves.